I knew something was wrong when the bank employee stopped mid-sentence and slowly tilted her monitor away from me because 30 seconds earlier she'd been cheerful, and now she was staring at my profile like it belonged to someone dangerous. And that's when she asked why I had 4 maxed out credit accounts I'd never opened. I didn't answer her at first. My mouth was open like I'd already started a sentence, but nothing came out. She waited, not impatient, just watching me over her glasses the way people do when they think you might suddenly become a problem. I leaned closer to the desk and said, "Can you scroll?" She hesitated, just a second, then she did. My name kept repeating down the screen, same spelling, same middle initial, lines of accounts stacked under it like receipts. I didn't recognize any of them. The balances didn't even look real. For a weird second, I thought maybe it was someone with the same name. That happens, right? It had to. "That's not mine," I said. "Which one?" she asked. "All of them." She stopped scrolling. Behind her, a printer started clicking through a job and someone laughed somewhere down the hall. It didn't match what I was looking at. It felt like background noise from the wrong movie. I pointed at one entry. "Open that." She clicked. Address line, street, zip code, my parents' house. My stomach dropped in this slow, delayed way, like my body understood before my brain did. I honestly tried to explain it to myself. Maybe I filled something out online and forgot. Maybe one of those sign-up things where you don't read and just hit agree. I do that sometimes. Everybody does. She opened the application details. Birth date, mine. Social, mine. Email, not mine. I stared at it. I knew that email. Long, annoying, too many numbers. I'd typed it for her 100 times growing up when she didn't feel like dealing with forms. The woman asked quietly, "Do you recognize this address?" "Yes." "Is it yours?" "No." She pressed her lips together and nodded once. Not surprised, just noted. My ears felt hot. I became very aware of my hands, like they didn't belong to me. I rubbed my thumb against my finger without meaning to, stopped, did it again. She said, "Would you like to dispute these accounts?" I looked back at the dates. Every single one was opened the month I moved out. Not before, not scattered, all right after, like someone had been waiting. "Yes," I said. She turned the monitor back toward herself a little after I said yes, like whatever was on it wasn't something I should stare at too long, and her voice dropped lower, not dramatic, just practical, and she asked if I'd ever filed a fraud report before, and I said no, because I hadn't, because why would I? And she nodded like that answer fit somewhere in a checklist she already had in her head, and started clicking through things while I stood there trying not to shift my weight, even though my legs wanted to move, and she asked me to confirm my social, and I did, and she checked it and then asked for my ID, and my license caught slightly on the edge of my wallet when I pulled it out, which was stupid, but suddenly felt important, like she'd notice and decide I was the kind of person who snagged cards and forgot payments and caused problems. And while she typed, she asked if anyone else might have access to my information, and I almost said no right away, automatic, the normal answer. But the word didn't come out because something in my head had already started lining things up without asking me first. Little flashes. My mom at the kitchen table sliding papers to me to sign because her wrist hurt, asking me to read numbers off forms because I read faster, telling relatives I handled all the boring admin stuff because I was organized. And I realized I was still standing there not answering, and the silence stretched just enough that she glanced up again, not pushing, just waiting. And I said my parents might have it, and she didn't react the way I expected. No raised eyebrows or sympathy face or anything. She just nodded once, like that made sense, like she'd heard it before, and printed something and slid it across to me with a pen, and said this would start the dispute process, and my name was already typed in bold letters with 4 account numbers listed under it, and a total that didn't look like it belonged to a person who still checked grocery prices. And I signed where she pointed, and my signature came out smaller than usual, cramped, like my hand didn't want to take up room on the page. And when I pushed it back, she stamped it without ceremony, just a flat, solid thunk that sounded louder than it should have, and said they'd notify the creditors today, and that I should consider putting a freeze on my credit as soon as possible. And I said okay, because that seemed like the only correct response. And while the printer hummed again, I glanced at the monitor, and the email field was still there on the application record. My mother's address sitting there next to my name, like it had every right to be there, like it wasn't strange at all, like this had always been normal, and I was just now catching up to it. The freeze didn't take long, which I hadn't expected because anything official usually drags, but it was just forms and passwords and confirmation emails, and then she said, "You're all set," like she was telling me my receipt had printed, and I nodded and walked out without really remembering crossing the lobby, and when I got to my car, I opened the door and just stayed there, half in, half out, because the heat outside hit my face, and I realized I hadn't noticed the weather at all before that, and a shopping cart rattled somewhere across the lot, and my phone started buzzing in my hand, and I already knew who it was before I looked, because nobody calls like that, back to back without waiting, and her name filled the screen, and I watched it ring until it stopped, and then it started again, and I didn't answer either time. I just opened my email instead, and there were 3 new messages already, one saying they got my fraud report, one saying the accounts were under review, one asking if I didn't authorize them, and I tapped yes on each and every one, and the screen refreshed, my shoulders dropped a little more without me meaning them to, like something was loosening thread by thread, and then a text came through that said, "Call me right now," and another right after that said, "There's been a mistake," and another that said, "You need to fix this today," and I could see her in my head pacing the kitchen with the phone pressed hard to her ear the way she used to when bills showed up late, except this time I wasn't there to read numbers out loud or reset passwords or explain things calmly while she talked over me. And then my dad called, which he never does during the day, and I let that ring too, and instead opened the last message from the bank confirming the freeze was active with a timestamp and a reference number, and I read it twice slowly, just to be sure it didn't change, and when I finally closed everything, the car felt quiet in that sealed way cars do when the doors are shut and the engine's off, and I noticed my hands were just resting on my legs, not moving, which felt strange because they'd been fidgeting all morning, and the phone buzzed again with a voicemail notification, but I set it on the passenger seat without listening, and people kept walking in and out of the bank carrying envelopes and coffee like it was any other weekday, and it occurred to me, not in some dramatic realization way, just plainly, that the reports were filed, the accounts were locked, the process had already started rolling forward somewhere without me, and for once, nothing needed explaining or fixing or smoothing over. There was nothing left for me to do except sit there and let it happen. If your own parents were calling non-stop after you froze accounts they opened in your name, would you answer, or would you let it ring like I did?